All right, everyone. I think we've reached the end. We've reached the end. We found the bottom line. As far as things can go down, we've reached the bottom. And from there, you can only go up because, well, what's happening, it seems in Oakland, California, hell has, so to say, frozen over. The NAACP, one of the main organizations pushing for all these defund the police movements and calling for protests and all these wild things, they are now doing a 180 and they're now calling for a state of emergency, an emergency declaration over crime. And interestingly, they're saying defund the police has failed, and they're saying that ironically, defunding the police has mostly harmed black communities. Here we are. Maybe we've gone as far, we've pushed the bar down as far as it can go, and it can only go up from here. you hit rock bottom, you can only go up. NAACP has found the bottom. Let me show you this real quick. Oakland NAACP, that's in California, right? Oakland, California, blasts local leaders, calls for state of emergency due to crime. And they say the Oakland NAACP has called on city leaders to declare a state of emergency due to rising crime, calling the situation a crisis, and has urged residents across the city to speak out against it. Instead of maybe defund the police, it'll be fund the police now. They're calling for the local community to get behind them on it. We need more law and order and safety. It says the group, alongside Bishop Bob Jackson of the Acts Full Gospel Church, issued the statement on Thursday, blasting both city and county officials as well as social justice movements. I thought they were a social justice movement, but here we are. I'll go a bit further into this, so we'll talk about something else. Let me show you this. This is one of the official statements. This is their official document, in fact, on this. The official letter. Failed leadership, including the movement, get this, including the movement to defund the police. Our district attorneys, like these Soros DAs, I don't know if this one is particular, but our district attorneys' unwillingness to charge and prosecute people who murder and commit life-threatening serious crime, and the proliferation of anti-police rhetoric. So they're calling out the light on crime DAs. They're calling out the anti-police rhetoric, i.e. the defund the police thing that was sweeping and burning down American cities just a few years ago, that these people were all behind. And all these other things causing light on crime policies, allowing murderers and rapists and serial thefts and robberies to take place. They're calling it out. And they're saying the proliferation of anti-police rhetoric have created a heyday for Oakland criminals. Now, briefly, they highlight a number of incidents and issues, such as women being targeted by what they say, quote unquote, are young mobs. Fancy way of saying youth gangs of youth who are going around targeting people, and oftentimes targeting people who are less able to defend themselves, and so they're groups of young men going after women and so on. And it notes as well that some of the big targets are residents of Asian descent being robbed in Chinatown, street vendors being robbed. They mention news crews, like TV crews being robbed, cameras stolen. I can actually say this from some of the things I've heard from, I have a camera guy I travel with sometimes. He was telling me that anytime they do photo shoots and stuff like that, they have to be really careful in San Francisco because they do have gangs that specifically target camera crews. So if they see film crews, if they see news crews, they will target those people to steal their cameras or equipment, which is actually very expensive. And they say this is NAACP again. African Americans are disproportionately hit the hardest by crime in East Oakland and other parts of the city, but residents from all parts of the city report that they do not feel safe, and they say everyone is in danger. We reached the bottom of the barrel. It seems that even in places that are very far left, even in places that are interestingly majority, this is a majority black neighborhood, the defund the police movement is imploding. The people who wanted police to no longer do their jobs, the people who wanted light on crime policies, the people who wanted to end the prison system, which, in my opinion, there are problems with the privately owned prison systems to an extent, but I don't think this is the answer. I don't think letting criminals out of prison was the answer to it. Just saying. If you have too many people in prison, which is the argument, and too tightly packed, well, either expand the prison to enable more room, or reassess the kind of things you're throwing them in prison for. Maybe maybe get rid of the IRS, or maybe get rid of the policies of, for example, targeting Americans for free speech laws or for violating COVID policies. Maybe that kind of stuff should not be considered crimes. Just saying. But I think things like robbery, things like theft, things like murder, things like car theft. Yeah, you probably need not only tough on crime laws, but much tougher on crime laws. This is one of the things that's misunderstood about the nature of law enforcement. One of the most basic functions of government is to mediate the conflicts and disputes between people so that you don't have mob rule, so you don't have people taking justice into their own hands. When people don't feel that it serves that purpose, that's when they take justice into their own hands. I'm aware of some of the politics among gangs and these other groups. I know a lot of it is revenge. Some guy comes into their territory, steals a car. Some guy comes into their territory, robs a woman. Turns out that woman is a guy's sister or mother or cousin, and they take revenge because they don't believe the justice system is going to give them justice. A lot of it is, quote-unquote street justice. And that's only caused because people don't believe in the integrity of the justice system. And when people don't believe the justice system is going to do them justice, what happens? Well, that's what happens. The other thing you have is people who don't feel there's consequence for doing things like this. If you have young men who believe they can literally, get away with murder or get away with robbery, there are some who will do it. And you see them doing it. I'm aware that there's organized retail crime, sometimes stealing, amounts in the hundreds of thousands, going location to location. If you go to some places in California, you can walk into a store and walk out with $900 worth of, stolen goods and get a slap on the wrist. What do you think is going to happen? If someone wants to hurt other people and you allow them to do it, they're going to do it. The nature of law enforcement, again, is twofold. One is to stop, mob justice, where people take the law into their own hands, or vigilantism. The system is supposed to mediate the conflicts between people and ensure that there's a higher view of the situation. And the other thing is to make sure that the punishment is in place to show there's consequence of action. And this is one of the things that's forgotten a lot of times. The purpose of tough on crime policy is not with the intent of maliciously throwing everybody in prison, typically, maybe into some totalitarian societies. Maybe if you're like a J6er, maybe that's another thing. Or if you're Donald Trump, they want to make up crimes on the fly. Maybe then they just want to go after you. But typically it's not like that. Typically it's about putting things in place to prevent you from doing it, to make sure that you weigh the consequences and you say, you know what? The risk just isn't worth it. The juice is not worth the squeeze. I'm not going to do this because I'm aware there are consequences of such an action. And because there are consequences of such an action, I'm going to choose to do something else that will bring me greater happiness in the future. And you'll have people who choose to not rob or steal or murder because they don't want to ruin their lives. Now, again, you have some people who do it out of vengeance. You have some people who do it because they're mentally ill. But a lot of people do it because they think it's going to enrich them. A lot of people do it because they want to better their lives. They want to get money. They want to make a profit. And if the betterment of their lives is to not commit the crime because the punishment is so great, well, they're going to do that instead. They're not going to do it. And of course, the other third tier of justice is justice for family members and justice for the victims. Another thing that's written off totally. And what you're seeing right now is a failure of the justice system, an utter failure of the justice system. And ironically, they say that, of course, oh, well, look, they're bringing race into it. So we have to talk about race. They're saying black Americans, African Americans, but I would argue there are plenty of white people in Africa, and not all black people in America are of African descent. I don't like the term for that reason. There are black people of countries outside of Africa who are not African American but are still black skinned. And there are people in Africa, again, who are of Arab descent or of white descent who are not black African. And so I don't like the term. I think it's a political term. But there are black Americans, people who've been here from, whose ancestors go back to the very early days of this country, who very much played a role in the founding of this country. There are black Americans who are being disproportionately victimized by this. And yes, you could argue, well, there are more, black Americans in prison. Well, sure, that's unfortunate. But who were their victims? A lot of times other black Americans. And if you're going to let the small number of people who do carry out the crimes and victimize people do it without punishment, who is going to be the main group that becomes the target? Well, as the AA and NAACP notes, they say in their exact words, quote, African Americans are disproportionately hit the hardest by crime in East Oakland and other parts of the city. It's the unfortunate reality. And so if you actually care about racial justice, well, maybe make sure that people of this race are not being targeted by criminals who feel there's no consequence of their actions. It's the real terrible irony that we're facing with these defund the police movements. I'd say, yeah, as NAACP notes, it probably hurts black communities more than anywhere else, because that's typically where the defund the police protests took place. That's typically where these, community organized, and keep in mind, it's not everybody who wanted this. But here's the way it went down. You had quote-unquote community organizers. You had actual Marxist and socialist organizations, and they had groups that were busing themselves all around the country, holding these protests in targeted communities. Many of the locals in those communities did not want those protests. Many of them did not support the violence, even if they supported the idea of, hey, Black Lives Matter. A lot of them were not behind the more extreme nature of those protests. But the extreme individuals with it, mainly communists and socialists, and people with these, again, NGOs and, community organizer, i.e. Saul Alinsky types like Barack Obama and so on. He was a community organizer. They're the ones pushing very radical policies that did not, in fact, serve the interest of the local communities and in no way represented the opinions of the average person. A lot of them were being led along by these, Pied Pipers, playing their flutes and dancing out of the city, and they just followed right along with it. And that's now they're living the consequences, unfortunately. Anyways, we've reached the bottom of the barrel, and from here, it seems that you have the opposite taking place. You now have these groups, including what I would consider to be very far left groups in some cases. You even have the Young Turks, in my opinion, one of the furthest left news outlets there is. Really starting to do a 180 and saying, wait a minute, this is a little too extreme for us. You see things start to change. Ironically, and this is one of the big ironies of communist movements and of socialist movements, do you know who the first people to become disenfranchised are? Typically the true believers. Typically the ones who legitimately believed in the, the fake virtues of the movements they got behind, the people who actually believe the narratives. The ones who think, yay, we're fighting for the justice of the little man. Yay, go power to the people. That's those ones. Yay, we're getting equal justice. We're getting rid of, fascism or tyranny. The ones who legitimately believe in it are the first ones to become disenfranchised when they see that the whole thing is, a fraud, basically, when they see that they were had, and it was just a giant power grab meant to grab from them the little bit of rights they have left and put it in the hands of the people who already wanted more, who had power and usually wanted more power. Typically, ironically, that's why a lot of communist movements execute those people. They're the first ones to be put against the wall and shot in most communist countries. It's why, for example, Che Guevara was murdered by his own, comrades. It's why Mao Zedong took the Youth League, the Young Pioneers, and the Communist Youth League, and shipped them all to the countryside and turned them all into farmers. Thank you for carrying out the revolution, comrade. Time to go become the underprivileged class and go farm 16 hours a day, 6 days a week for the motherland. It's those people, ironically, who are the first ones to become disenfranchised. But here we see that, they didn't put them against the wall. They didn't ship them off to become peasants. Here we see that they've, of course, these people are still around and they're becoming disenfranchised, as they always have historically. You're seeing the people who believed in the things becoming the first ones to really see the consequences of it and realizing that they were had. They were scammed. They were conned. And the people who claimed to have their interest in mind did not have their interest in mind, and they got conned. And they're seeing it now. That said, let's jump over to Epoch TV. We'll talk about the Ukraine peace talks starting actually in a few days, actually. And also Hollywood going full panic, going full NPC. They're losing their humanity, what little bit they had. And they're adopting full score, the AI. I'll explain to you why that matters, because it's actually kind of funny. And also, notably, this is the same thing happened with how reality TV started. It's going to be interesting. I'll talk about it in a minute. That said, we have a new documentary. You can watch it on Epoch TV, EpochTV.com. So head over there now. We're going to finish the rest of the episode over there. It's called The Gotaways, and it's about they call them the Gotaways, the people who are oftentimes actual criminals, criminal aliens, you would call them, coming across our border, bringing drugs and crime and terrorism and many other things. I highly recommend it. Let me show you a trailer of that. We'll jump over to Epoch TV and we'll continue the episode.
People from 160 countries illegally cross the U.S.-Mexico border and give themselves up to Border Patrol. But what about the ones who evade Border Patrol? These are known as the Gotaways.
You can safely assume that anybody that went through the extra effort to avoid U.S. Border Patrol was not an asylum seeker by default.
It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, but somewhere down the road, if somebody rapes and kills somebody, and we find out that they came through here on my watch, that's unacceptable.
These men had surrounded my house. They were banging on my back door. They were banging on my front door.
You can't understand it unless you're out here seeing it every day. 21 dead bodies on the property.
Code 3 response.
Is it wrong to ask people to come to your front door of your home? Then why would it be wrong to ask people to come to the front door of our nation?
Their primary goal is to circumvent the checkpoints, go undetected.
People that do not want to surrender, those are going to be the potential terrorists, the criminals, the real threat to the U.S.
We were hoping the federal government would step in and do something, but they didn't.
We have no clue who they are or where they're going. That's the scary part.